Distinguished guests, please take your seats. We will start in a few minutes. Distinguished guests, please take your seats. We will start in 1 minute. Where is he? Don't see him. Distinguished guests, we will begin with a video message featuring the American University of Iraq Slimani, followed by a welcome message by the president of the university, Professor Bruce Walker Ferguson.
American University of Iraq Slimani, a benchmark of American-style educational excellence in Iraq and the Kurdistan region. Nestled in Slimani, the region's cultural capital and UNESCO City of Literature, the university opened its doors in 2007 to provide a world-class education to the region's next generation of leaders.
AUIS has prepared us, I think, very well for the outside world, even though I don't know what it looks like just yet. However, I feel well prepared and I'm excited.
We have gained skills and talents that is important for our future careers and future academic life that we want to approach.
In 2021, AUIS worked with governments in Baghdad, Erbil, and Slimani in an impressive show of humanitarian support for over 100 Afghan students to continue their studies at AUIS.
I want to thank people who made it possible for us to come here and have a better and safer life. Thank you.
AUIS boasts a uniquely diverse campus where students from across Iraq and Kurdistan come together with faculty and staff representing 20 different countries. And the success of AUIS students continues well after graduation, with alumni employed primarily in the private sector or pursuing postgraduate studies across the world.
When I was at AUIS, I spent my time working to represent AUIS in global competitions, and that took me to London as well as Washington.
Today, I can proudly say that AUIS has significantly contributed to the success of my professional career, and this institution well equipped me with the skills, knowledge, and experience that put me on a prosperous career path in international affairs.
Held at AUIS since 2013, the Slimani Forum brings together globally recognized policymakers, analysts, and scholars from across the world to discuss the region's most pressing issues. Celebrating its 15th year in 2022, AUIS remains committed to its position as an institution of regional and global significance, preparing students for successful careers in a modern, pluralistic society and global environment.
Professor Ferguson.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Current and present prime ministers, deputy prime ministers, presidents, vice presidents, ministers and deputy ministers, ambassadors and chargés d'affaires, senior statesmen, senior academicians, senior journalists from around the world. I welcome you to American University of Iraq Sulaimani and our 7th Sulaimani Forum. First, I wish to thank Dr. Max Skelton, the director of the IRIS organization that sponsors the forum, his IRIS team, and our university staff for their incredibly hard work during the last several months in arranging this wonderful event. I thank the founder of this university, Dr. Barham Saleh, a current trustee of our Board of Trustees, as well as the chair of our Board of Trustees, Dr. Jill Derby, and those trustees who came from all across the world to be with us today, as did many of you as well. Special thanks to the first AUIS alumnus to serve on our Board of Trustees, Mr. Saad Hassan, who has generously contributed to the financial support of this event. On your way to this conference room, you may have noticed flags placed along the entrance of the building and flags in the hallways. Apart from a few exceptions, such as for the United Nations and our own university flags, these flags represent the nationalities of faculty and staff who have worked at AUIS since its founding 16 years ago. We also have today faculty and staff from 20 countries. We have students from all 19 governorates in Iraq, as well as neighboring countries such as Syria, Turkey, Iran, and a bit farther afield, Afghanistan. More than 27% of our students come from outside the Kurdistan region, which I believe is the highest number of that kind for any university in the region. So AUIS belongs in the category of special universities that support diversity as a means of education. It's one reason why we view ourselves as an American-style university. A second reason, we believe our students learn outside the classroom as well as inside. To us, it's just as important that the students learn teamwork and leadership skills on a football field as it is for them to learn academic excellence and critical thinking skills in the classroom. As a non-governmental, not-for-profit university dedicated to the public interest without investors or stockholders, our university educates the kind of people that every country needs: respected citizens and community leaders, as well as outstanding employees and professional leaders. So I am pleased today that the flags at AUIS celebrate not just our university community, but the diverse experience and viewpoints of you, our distinguished guests. As the Danish mathematician Piet Hein once observed, problems worthy of attack prove their worth by fighting back. And you will be discussing some very worthy problems today. Please know that you have the support of all of us at this university in this important work. It's now my pleasure to introduce my partner and friend, the founder of AUIS and the founder of Sulaimani Forum, former President of Iraq, the Honorable Dr. Barham Saleh.
بناوي خواي گەورە و میهرەبان بەخێر بێن سەرچاوان بە دیدارتان شادین لە دیداری سلەیمانی. هیوادارم هەم خۆتان هەم میوانە بەڕێزەکان پێکەوە ئەم دوو ڕۆژەی دیداری سلەیمانی دەرفەتێک بێ بۆ باسکردن و بە دوواداچوونی کۆمەڵێ لەو پرسە گرنگانەی ڕوبەڕووی وڵاتەکەمان و چاوەڕوانی خەڵکی ئەم نیشتیمانە دەبێتەوە. دڵنیام لە کەش و هەوایەکی ئازاد و دڵسۆزانە ئەم پرس و باسانە دەکرێت و دەخرێتە خزمەتی دەوڵەمەندکردنی کۆی تێگەیشتن هەم لە وەزعی کوردستان، عێراق، ناوچەکە و هەوڵدان بۆ سازدانی توانا و وزەکان بۆ خزمەتکردنی کۆمەڵانی خەڵک. تەشریفتان هێناوە بۆ زانکۆی ئەمریکی عێراق لە سلەیمانی دووبارەی دەکەمەوە. ئەمە پرۆژەیەکی گشتیە، مڵکی کەس نییە، بۆ خزمەتی خەڵکە قازانجنەویستە. هاوکاریەکە بۆ شاری هەڵمەت و قوربانی، شاری ڕۆشنبیری سلێمانی و هاوکاریە بۆ کوردستان و بۆ عێراق و لێرەشەوە چەندین نەوەی لاوی ئەم وڵاتە پێگەێنراوە بە هیوای ئەوەی بەشدار بن لە ئاوەدانی و خزمەتکردنی وڵاتەکەیانە. هیچ چاوەڕوانی پشتیوانی و هاوکاریتانین. دووبارەی دەکەمەوە ئەمە زانکۆیەکی گشتیە، مڵکی کەس نییە، داهاتی بۆ کەس نییە، تەنها و تەنها ئامانجی خزمەتکردنی خوێندکاران و پێگەیاندنی نەوەی نوێیە. ئەم دیدارەمان لە کاتێکا دەبەستین 20 ساڵ بەسەر ڕاماڵینی ڕژێمی پێشووی عێراقدا تێپەڕی. سبەینێ یادی هەڵەبجەیە. گرنگە لەم دەرفەتەدا ئاوەردانەوەیەک لە 20 ساڵی ڕابردوو بکەین، ئەوەی دەستکەوت، ئەو ئامانجانەی پێگەیشتوین، بەڵام لە هەمان کاتیش هات دڵنیام ئەو کۆمەڵە چاوەڕوانیانەی کە تاوەکو ئێستاش خەڵکی عێراق و خەڵکی کوردستان بە دوایدا وێڵن. بایەخی عێراق لە ناوچەکە گەورەیە. چۆن دەتوانین دەوری کوردستان، دەوری عێراق، دەوری ئەم پێکهاتانە هەمووی بەیەکەوە کارێ بکەین بۆ ئاوەدانی و خزمەتگوزاری و پێکەوە ژیانی خەڵک تەرخان بکەین و قازانجی دادپەروەری و خۆشگوزەرانی خەڵک. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. دولة رئيس الوزراء محمد شيع السوداني، سيد رئيس مجلس القضاء القاضي فاق زيدان، أخي وعزيزي سيد رئيس إقليم كردستان كاكا نيجرفان برزاني، معالي الوزراء وأصحاب السعادة والإخوة والأخوات والضيوف الكرام، مرحبا بكم في السليمانية، في ملتقى السليمانية. هذه الدورة السابعة لملتقى السليمانية، نجتمع فيه بحضور هذه المجموعة الخيرة النيرة المهمة من الكفاءات العراقية ومن الباحثين والمهتمين بالشأن العراقي والإقليمي من عموم المنطقة. فرصة مهمة أن نتحاور فيما بيننا بما يهدف إلى إثراء المواضيع الحيوية التي نجابهها في العراق وفي إقليم كردستان وعلى صعيد المنطقة. هذا الملتقى يعقد ونحن نستذكر الذكرى 20 لإزاحة النظام السابق. قطعاً هذه المناسبة تحمل معها الكثير والكثير من المعاني والأبعاد الذي نتفق في قسم منها ونختلف في قسم آخر. أتمنى أن لا نختلف في أن إنهاء النظام السابق واستبداده وبطشه كان عملاً جباراً ومهماً، وأتى نتيجة نضال طويل وشاق من العراقيين بمختلف فئاتهم، ودفع العراقيون أثماناً باهظة من أجل إنهاء النظام الدكتاتوري، وتطلب تدخل دولي بقيادة الولايات المتحدة لإسقاط النظام في وقته، وكان حدثاً جللاً مهماً وأدى إلى تحولات كبرى في هذه المنطقة. نستذكر شهداءنا وضحايا النظام والذين سقطوا من العراقيين ومن التحالف الدولي في عملية إسقاط النظام وفي عملية مجابهة الإرهاب الذي اجتاح بلدنا. نشكر كل من وقف مع العراق من التحالف الدولي وأيضا من جيراننا الذين هبوا لمساعدتنا في تلك الأيام الحالكة. بعد 20 سنة سيداتي سادتي، لنا أن نعتز بإنجازات تحققت على الأرض وليست بقليلة، ولكن قطعاً وكلنا نتفق على الأقل لفظياً بأن هناك مساحة كبيرة من التوقعات التي لم تتحقق للعراقيين وهم يتطلعون إلى تحقيقها. المهم، بالرغم من كل المشاكل الموجودة في بلدنا، ثبت مبدأ التداول السلمي للسلطة في بلادنا، وهناك تغيير ل6 حكومات الآن. معنا اليوم دولة رئيس الوزراء السوداني، معنا دولة رئيس الوزراء اياد علاوي، دولة رئيس الوزراء حيدر العبادي والإخوة الآخرين، واتصور أنا أيضا رئيس سابق. هذه حالة بدون سابقة في بلادنا. لا أدعي بأنها مثالية قطعاً هناك مشاكل كثيرة متراكمة، لنا أن نعيها ونعرفها حق المعرفة، فأن انتظار العراقيين لا يستطيع أن يدوم. نحن بحاجة إلى إصلاحات بنيوية، لا أريد أن أدخل في هذا الجانب. نحن بحاجة إلى مراجعة قضايا أساسية ضمن البيت العراقي وبأريحية وضمن ما توافقنا عليه في قضايا أساسية تخدم بلدنا. مهم جدا أن ننظر أيضا إلى دور العراق الإقليمي، العراق الذي كان مثاراً للمشاكل في المنطقة ومصدر إشكاليات لجوارنا، ونحن ساحة صراع وإشكاليات لجوارنا بحساب العراقيين وأرواحهم وأموالهم. آن الأوان أن يتحول العراق بحقيقة إلى مساحة توافق إقليمي وضامن لمنظومة إقليمية متكاملة اقتصادية سياسية أمنية. تحقق الكثير في هذا المجال، لكن ينتظرنا المزيد، وأملنا بقادة البلد والفعاليات الاجتماعية والسياسية أن يقوموا بذلك. لا أطيل عليكم، فأمامنا نقاشات كثيرة سنقف عليها. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you got a wind of what I have said. Welcome to Suleimani, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to have you all with us. We are meeting on the 20th anniversary of the war that got rid of Saddam Hussein. That was a historic achievement not to be underestimated. We salute those who struggled so hard in order to get rid of dictatorship. We salute and honor the sacrifices of the Iraqi people in this regard, and also of the international coalition and the Americans who have come and helped us do that. 20 years on, it's time for us to reflect in a serious way about what we have done and how we can improve. Hopefully this forum will be an opportunity to do this. I will conclude by welcoming you again, wishing you having a good time in Suleimani, and wishing you 2 days of productive conversations in the forum. And now I'm honored to relay to you a special message that has been conveyed to the forum from the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. بشانازی و پیامێکی تایبەتی سکرتێری گشتینەتەوەیە گرتووەکانتان پێشکەشەکەین بۆ کە بۆ ئەم دیدارەی ناردووە. نتقدم إليكم برسالة خاصة من السيد الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة الذي أرسله بمناسبة انعقاد هذا الملتقى. شكرا جزيلا.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to greet the Suleimani Forum and thank you for advancing dialogue on the complex challenges facing Iraq and the broader Middle East region. We all recognize that these challenges did not arise overnight, They are the product of decades of oppression, war, terrorism, sectarianism, and foreign interference. And no one can expect these challenges to be resolved overnight, least of all at a time of escalating geopolitical tensions, economic uncertainty, and proliferating conflicts. But I've just come back from Iraq with the real sense that the window of opportunity has opened to achieve progress. Progress on improving public services, diversifying the economy, and creating decent work opportunities for young people. Progress in strengthening human rights, in the fight against corruption, and in the pursuit of domestic and regional stability through diplomacy and dialogue. And progress in building resilience to climate shocks and water scarcity that threaten lives and livelihoods. Mesopotamia is the ancient land between the rivers. It cannot become the modern land without rivers. In all of this and more, national unity, regional cooperation, and multilateral action are essential. The United Nations is proud to continue to support Iraq in tackling the challenges of today and tomorrow. Together, let us keep working towards sustainable, inclusive solutions for the benefit of all people across Iraq and the wider Middle East. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Institute of Regional and International Studies to the Sulaimani Forum. IRIS is honored to plan and host the Sulaimani Forum in conjunction with other university departments. As the university's flagship research center, IRIS is committed to policy-relevant research that is deeply rooted in the Iraqi context, while also drawing connections across borders. IRIS firmly believes that policy analysis requires political and historical context. In that vein, our research looks at how some of the most complex challenges facing Iraq, from environmental degradation to protracted displacement to corruption, are shaped by political dynamics and the enduring legacies of war. A very quick word of thanks before I welcome the Prime Minister to the stage. I'm very lucky as director of the Institute to have such a wonderful group of AUIS and IRIS colleagues that have worked so diligently to make this forum possible, especially Mr. Shavan Najm, Ms. Zainab Hamid, Mr. Ranj Saraj, and Mr. Adnan Jaffer. Thank you for your dedication. One administrative detail. So the Sulaimani Forum phone application contains everything you need to know about the program and all the panel sessions, including the speakers and times. And this also includes the policy roundtables that are on the wings of the forum. You can download the application through the QR code on the screen. The application will be very important during the panel sessions. Questions to the moderators can only be submitted through the Sulaimani Forum application. Moderators will not take questions from the floor. Also, please note that we do not have scheduled breaks during the plenary sessions. If you need to exit the session for any reason, please exit through the doors on the right side of the hall. Now, let me turn to the keynote speech with the Prime Minister, which will be followed by a one-on-one conversation with journalist Jane Araf. Without further ado, on behalf of the wider AUIS community, it is my pleasure to welcome the Prime Minister of the Republic of Iraq, His Excellency Mohammed Shia al-Sudani.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيدات السادة الحضور، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. في البدء شكرا جزيلا للأخ العزيز السيد رئيس الجمهورية السابق الدكتور برهم صالح على هذه الدعوة، ولكل القائمين على هذا الملتقى أن أكون بينكم في هذا الصرح العلمي والمعرفي الكبير، وفرصة مهمة أن نجتمع بهذا العدد من مسؤولين وقادة وباحثين وأساتذة، وهو دليل بالتأكيد على حرية التعبير وممارسة الحياة الديمقراطية في العراق اليوم. السيدات والسادة، نحن اليوم أمام ما يقارب عن 5 أشهر من عمر هذه الحكومة التي جاءت بعد اتفاق سياسي وتبنت منهاج وزاري وأعدت برنامج حكومي تعهدنا خلاله على تقديم الخدمات لشعبنا وبناء اقتصاد قوي متماسك ونهضوي لهذا البلد مما يعمم الرخاء والسعة لشعبنا في كل أصقاع البلاد. في هذا العمر القصير في عهود الحكومات تمكنا من تحقيق نسب كبيرة من البرنامج الوزاري، ومنذ يومين ولله الحمد تم إقرار مسودة مشروع قانون الموازنة لعام 2023 والتي ستترجم عملياً أهداف البرنامج الحكومي. ولأول مرة نجحنا وبخطوة علمية أن تكون الموازنة ل3 سنوات لنضمن الاستقرار المالي مما يؤدي إلى استمرار تقديم الخدمات وتواصل تنفيذ المشاريع الكبرى بانسيابية وسهولة بعيداً عن التأخير والأزمات السياسية. رغم أن طموحاتنا كبيرة في تحقيق المزيد من المشاريع الاستراتيجية لبناء بلدنا، ولكننا ننظر إلى هذه الموازنة بأنها واقعية تعالج المشاكل المتراكمة لما تحتويه في تفاصيلها من برامج مهمة منبثقة عن المنهاج الوزاري. لقد جاء الاتفاق على مشروع قانون الموازنة وسياساتها ليمثل خطوة جريئة تتفادى الإخفاقات السابقة وتعبر عن الثقة والوضوح في الرؤية المرسومة لأهدافنا المعلنة وفي مقدمتها خدمة المواطن. الموازنة مفتاح مهم من بين المفاتيح التي تفتح أبواب الحل، وقد سبق وأن قدمنا حلولاً تستقر نقاط الحاجة والضرورات القصوى لشعبنا التي إن لم نتصدى لها فلن تنفع كل الحلول المؤقتة الأخرى. وأعني هنا أولويات معالجة البطالة ومكافحة الفقر ومكافحة الفساد والشروع بالإصلاح الاقتصادي وصولاً إلى تقديم الخدمات اللائقة والدائمة للمواطنين وفي كل مكان. وانطلاقاً من هذه الخطوات سيتحقق الاستقرار المالي والسياسي، وهو ما سيعبد الطريق أمام الاستثمار الأمثل والأفضل لثروة بلدنا الأولى، وإكمال تشريع قانون النفط والغاز والتفاهم مع حكومة إقليم كردستان العراق بهذا الصدد لنغادر مصطلح المشاكل العالقة لتصبح نزراً من الماضي ونستبدلها بعبارات مثل المشاريع المستدامة، الفرص الاقتصادية المشتركة، المصلحة الوطنية العليا من أجل رفاه حقيقي ومستدام وعادل لكل أبناء الشعب العراقي في كل قرية وكل قضاء ومدينة. السيدات والسادة، نحن بصدد مناسبة ذكراها حزينة على شعبنا، الذكرى المؤلمة لجريمة نكراء ارتكبها النظام الدكتاتوري ضد شعبنا الكردي المغدور في مدينة حلبجة. وصوتنا في مجلس الوزراء قبل يومين على مشروع تحويل هذه المدينة المضحية إلى محافظة بحد ذاتها، وهذه أقل ما يمكن أن نقدمه مقابل تضحياتهم الجسام. يوم أمس كانت لقاءاتنا في أربيل مثمرة، حيث التقيت مجموعة من رؤساء الأحزاب وممثلي المكونات وتحاورنا بلا قيود، لأننا قولاً وفعلاً أبناء وطن واحد مصير واحد. ولا يفوتني الثناء على الجهود المبذولة للتوفيق بين القيادات السياسية الكردستانية وحثها على توحيد الصف، ونحن داعمون لهذه الجهود، فالتفرق هو ضعف للإقليم، ونحن نؤمن بوضوح أن قوة الإقليم هي قوة وعزم لباقي أنحاء العراق، وإذا كان العراق كله قوي فالجزء المتمثل بإقليم كردستان العراق سيبقى قوياً عزيزاً أيضاً. العراق كل واحد غير قابل للتقسيم أو التجزئة، وقوة الدولة العراقية واستقرارها تنبع من الدستور ومن وحدة المكونات. أما النعرات المشوهة لوحدة العراق والتي ترى أن قوة جزء من أجزائه لن تتحقق إلا بإضعاف الحكومة الاتحادية أو بإضعاف المكونات الأخرى في البلاد، فهذا النهج كان مدخلاً للتنظيمات الإرهابية وتحديداً تنظيم داعش الإرهابي للانقضاض على قلب الدولة، مهدداً جميع المكونات من دون استثناء. الحضور الكريم، إننا نتطلع إلى شراكات اقتصادية عميقة ومستدامة تجمعنا بالشعوب الشقيقة والصديقة، ونتبادل الحرص على الأمن معهم، وبالتعاون الاقتصادي الفعال والمثمر الذي تلمسه الشعوب قبل الحكومات يمكن فقط التأسيس لأمن مستدام ورفاه يمتد على بساط الصداقة. لن نقبل أبداً أن تكون أرض العراق منطلقاً لتهديد أمن الجوار، هذا هو دستورنا وما نص عليه، وهو يلزمنا بعدم التدخل في شؤون الآخرين ومراعاة حسن الجوار والتعامل بالمثل والتمسك بالالتزامات، مثلما لا نقبل بأن تمس كرامة أرضنا وسيادتنا انطلاقاً من الجوار أو من غير الجوار. ولهذا فقد أولت حكومتنا مبكراً أهمية خاصة لتدعيم قوات حرس الحدود، وزادت من جهود ضبطها ومنع التسلل والقضاء على أي قوة تسعى لزعزعة الاستقرار سواء في إقليم كردستان أو في أي مكان آخر من أرض العراق. كما أن العراق لن يكون ممراً للاعتداء على الجوار، وعلى الجميع أن يحترموا سيادتنا كما نحن نحترم سيادتهم ونصون حدودهم. إن تاريخ العراق وموقعه الجغرافي وإمكانياته وقدراته الاقتصادية وما يمتلكه من موارد بشرية وما يتصف به شعبنا من سمات كلها مجتمعة تؤهله للعب دور محوري في منطقة الشرق الأوسط والعالم كي يصبح مرتكزاً إقليمياً. فالحضارة الإنسانية وضعت أسسها الأولى هنا، ومنحت العراقي بذلك زخماً تاريخياً يجعله على دراية تامة بأهمية العلاقات بين الشعوب والأمم وفقاً لمعايير المصالح والتعاون بعيداً عن العداء والتطاحن. ونحن نعمل الآن على استثمار جميع تلك المكونات الاقتصادية والتاريخية والجغرافية للحفاظ على سلامة ووحدة أراضينا وخدمة شعبنا وتقوية روابطنا وشراكاتنا الإقليمية والدولية. السيدات والسادة المحترمون، إن هذا الأسبوع كان حافلاً بالنجاحات وبتسليط الضوء على قضية إنسانية تربط العراق بمحيطه الإقليمي والدولي عبر عقدنا مؤتمر المناخ في البصرة، لنتعرف عن كثب على خطورة التغيرات المناخية وتأثيراتها السلبية على بلادنا. وتعمل حكومتنا على العديد من الخطوات العملية لمعالجة الآثار السلبية على المجتمع والدولة. لقد سعينا ضمن برنامجنا الحكومي لمنح الأولوية لمواجهة آثار التغيرات المناخية عبر عدد من المشاريع التي تسهم في تقليل الانبعاثات، منها إنشاء محطات الطاقة المتجددة وتأهيل مواقع التمر الصحي المغلقة ومشاريع مكافحة التصحر وتقنيات الري المقننة للمياه ومعالجات المياه الثقيلة. ووقعنا مؤخراً عقود جولة التراخيص الخامسة للاستثمار الغاز المصاحب ووقف حرقه لخفض الانبعاثات الكربونية بنسب كبيرة، وسنمضي في تطوير المشاريع التي تحول الغاز المصاحب إلى مصدر مهم للطاقة الكهربائية. ولم نتوقف عند حصر المشكلة وتحديدها، بل أطلقنا مبادرة كبرى للتشجير تشمل زراعة 5 ملايين شجرة ونخلة في عموم محافظات العراق، يرافقها إطلاق دليل وطني للتشجير الحضري ولأول مرة في العراق. وأخيراً، يجب ألا ننسى أن العراق قد حارب نيابة عن العالم أجمع الجماعات التكفيرية الأكثر شراسة في التاريخ، ولولا هذا البلد العظيم والغني بأهله وصلابته وإصراره على محاربة جماعات الإرهاب لعاثت في الأرض شراً وفسادا، ولاستمرت بأعمالها ومخططاتها الإجرامية في باقي بقاع المعمورة من أقصى الشرق إلى أقصى الغرب. عراقنا يرى أن العالم يمكنه أن يتعلم الدروس الكثيرة والغزيرة من معركة الشعب العراقي بمختلف أعراقه وأديانه في حربه ضد الإرهاب، وأن يتعلم الدرس الأسمى المتمثل بالوحدة والتعاون والجدية والإصرار، وأنها ستكون المصد الأقوى في وجه الإرهاب. سيبقى العراق قوياً بتماسك كل مكوناته وشعبه، فالعراق هو بلد المكونات والتعدديات والثقافات والديانات المختلفة تجتمع تحت ظل بيتنا الكبير العراق الذي ليس لنا غيره. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's so wonderful to be back here at the Suleymaniyah Forum, which I've always thought of since it started a decade ago as the home to some of the most interesting conversations in the Middle East. And that's why it's such an honor and a great pleasure to speak to Prime Minister Sudani. Mr. Prime Minister, you mentioned in your address some of the many developments that have taken place in the short time you've been in office. The multi-year budget approved by Cabinet, the climate change initiative, regional initiatives, and those ongoing challenges in bringing armed groups under the rule of law and warding off threats from Iraq's neighbors. So I'd like to ask you about some of those, but first I wanted to ask you a question that acknowledges that we are getting close to the anniversary of the US-led invasion of Iraq and the end of Saddam Hussein's Iraq. And I think one of the very interesting things about you is that unlike most other politicians, senior leaders in Iraq, you never left, you stayed. You stayed during that very devastating period of sanctions under Saddam, during the uprisings, and I'm wondering how that has affected, if it has, your approach to governing Iraq, or even how you view the country.
شكرا جزيلا لكم على إدارة هذا اللقاء. بالتأكيد نستذكر المآسي والجرائم والحروب العبثية والحصارات والفقر الذي استشرى بشكل واضح صور مؤلمة طيلة الحقب الزمنية لفترة النظام الدكتاتوري. هذا ينعكس على رؤيتنا لعراق المستقبل، والذي نرى أنه يجب أن يكون عراق مستقر مسالم بعيداً عن الحروب والتدخلات الخارجية، بنفس الوقت بعيداً عن الصراعات. لا نقبل للعراق أن يكون ساحة لتصفية الحسابات. نريد أن نعمل أن يكون العراق ساحة لالتقاء الفرقاء والشراكات الاقتصادية، وهذا ما نعمل وتعمل عليه الحكومة. ولدينا من المقومات التي نعتقد بأنها كفيلة أن تؤسس للعراق أن يكون مرتكزاً للتعاون للشراكات الاقتصادية مع الدول الإقليمية والعالم. بالتأكيد أنا شخصياً ممن عايش فترة النظام السابق وتعرض للظلم حال كثير من العراقيين. هذا دافع لي على المستوى الإنساني والأخلاقي أن لا يتكرر الظلم مع أي عراقي في كل مكان في أرجاء العراق.
Thank you. You know, it's often said that the United States and its allies invaded a country that they didn't understand. I'm wondering, is there something, what would it be, that you would like the West to understand better about Iraq now? And also, is Iraq fundamentally the same country as it was in 2003? And are Iraqis the same as they were?
الولايات المتحدة ساعدت العراق في عملية التغيير، وانتهينا إلى اتفاقية إطار استراتيجي. العراق ينظر للولايات المتحدة أنها شريك استراتيجي، ومن مصلحة العراق أن يقيم علاقة على كافة الأصعدة وأن نفعل اتفاقية الإطار الاستراتيجي بمجالاتها الأمنية والسياسية والاقتصادية والتكنولوجية، وهذا ما نعمل عليه. ما نريده من الغرب عموما أن يتفهم الوضع العراقي. نحن هنا نتكلم عن بلد لديه إرث حضاري، لديه اعتزاز بنفسه، يمثل مكونات وأطياف وأديان، يرتبط بمصالح مع دول المنطقة. هذه النظرة التي يجب أن تكون حاضرة في تفكير الغرب تجاه العراق. لا يمكن أن يصطف العراق في محور ضد الآخر، وإنما قدر العراق أن يكون ساحة للتلاقي، وهو مؤهل لهذا الدور. وأعتقد أن قوة واستقرار العراق هي قوة واستقرار للمنطقة والعالم، وهذه هي النقطة المشتركة التي نجتمع فيها مع الأصدقاء في الغرب.
Thank you. You know, the new generation of young Iraqis, including students at this university, they've grown up without the memory of Saddam Hussein, and many of them have also grown up without a sense of stability or security or hope in the future. What is it that you can promise to the young generation that you can do for them? And what reason would you give them not to leave Iraq?
واحدة من التحديات التي تواجه الحكومة وتواجه الدولة العراقية هو أننا أمام مجتمع فتي يمثل الشباب النسبة الأكبر، وهذه الشريحة المهمة إذا استثمرت بالشكل الصحيح قطعاً سوف تكون عامل قوة للدولة واستقرارها وازدهارها. كحكومة نعمل على عدة جوانب، لكن الجانب المهم هو في كيفية إيجاد فرص عمل للشباب. في ظل الظروف المالية الحالية ليس من المستطاع أن نغطي هذه الحاجة من فرص العمل من خلال التوظيف الحكومي، لذلك نعمل مع الشباب في برامج عدة، ولعل من أهمها برنامج ريادة الذي أطلقناه مؤخراً، وهو بفلسفة جديدة تذهب إلى طلاب الإعداديات والمعاهد والكليات من خلال تأهيلهم في تأسيس مشاريع خاصة تحظى بتمويل ورعاية مستمرة لتأسيس شركات صغيرة تتطور بالمستقبل إلى متوسطة وإلى كبيرة. هذا من المشاريع الواعدة التي سوف تستقطب جزء كبير من الشباب العراقي المثابر الذي يستحق منا هذه العناية وهذا الاهتمام.
So it seems that that private sector initiative is really intertwined, I would think, with the issues of corruption and bureaucracy. What do you think you will be able to do on those two issues so that you can encourage a proper private sector?
أنا أطلقت على الفساد بالجائحة، ومطلوب مني أن أجد اللقاح لمواجهة هذه الجائحة. الفساد تهديد خطير للدولة العراقية، يهدد كل الخطط والبرامج والسياسات التي ننوي تنفيذها. بدون الوقوف أمام هذه الظاهرة والحد منها بإجراءات مهنية قانونية سليمة لن يكتب لهذه الخطط ولن يكون الطريق سالكا أمام القطاع الخاص الذي نعول عليه. بدون القطاع الخاص لا نستطيع أن نلبي حاجات المجتمع أو نستوعب هذا الكم الهائل من المطالب والخدمات. الفساد بمعالجاتنا الحالية نستهدف استرداد الأموال من الفاسدين الذين تجاوزوا على المال العام بحكم وجودهم في مواقع رسمية أو غير رسمية واحتالوا على الدولة. هذا تحدي وهذا التزام أمام حكومتي أمام الشعب. قطعنا خطوات مهمة وأسسنا لهذا المفهوم في مكافحة هذا الظاهرة. أما مسألة القطاع الخاص بعد مكافحة الفساد يجب أن نكون على استعداد لتهيئة البيئة السليمة الجاذبة للقطاع الخاص، بعيداً عن الروتين، عن التعقيدات، عن آليات العمل المعطلة التي يشكو منها كل القطاع الخاص. أنا أولي اهتمام لهذا الأمر، أتدخل على مستوى المشروع والمستثمر في هذا الموقع أو ذاك لإيمان المطلق بأهمية هذا القطاع الذي سوف يكون أفضل سند للحكومة في معالجة الأزمات.
Thank you. One of the biggest worries that Iraqis mention most is the power of Iran-influenced armed groups that don't follow the rule of law. Can you tell us what do you think you will realistically be able to do to rein them in? And what do you think are the limits of what you can do?
هذه واحدة من القضايا الحساسة والتي تواجه مهمتنا في بناء الدولة وسلطة القانون، وقد خضعت لنقاش مع كل الأطراف. السياسية والتي لديها أجنحة مسلحة، وخرجنا باتفاق، وأنا ذكرته قبل أن أكلف رسميا بأن سلطة الدولة إنفاذ القانون المؤسسات الأمنية خيار لا بديل عنه، ونذهب لمعالجة كل المشاكل والمخاوف والقضايا أو المتبنيات التي لدى البعض في مسألة سيادة البلد وفق الأطر الدستورية والقانونية، وخصوصا ما يتعلق بتواجد القوات الأجنبية التي هي عادة ما تكون سبب لبعض الجهات المسلحة أن تستخدم العنف. خرجنا باتفاق أن هذه الحكومة هي المعنية بإيجاد هذه التفاهم مع المجتمع الدولي لشكل العلاقة المستقبلية، خصوصا في علاقتنا الأمنية مع قوى التحالف الدولي. الحكومة بأجهزتها المعنية وبشكل مهني هي من تقرر هذه الحاجة والوقت والمجالات لهذا التعاون، وهذا باتفاق سياسي قبل تشكيل الحكومة، ولحد الآن الكل حريص على تنفيذه.
That's very interesting, because the Iran-influenced groups have traditionally, some of them, seen the presence of U.S. forces here as an existential threat, a threat to their existence. Do you believe now that, you seem to be saying, but do you believe that there is more acceptance among those groups of the continued need for non-combat American and other foreign forces?
نعم، هناك مبالغة في الحديث عن التدخل الإيراني في الشأن العراقي، وفي الأحيان يصور أن الدولة العراقية غائبة ليس فيها من المؤسسات أو رجالات الدولة أو الوطنيين الحريصين على استقلالية القرار الوطني. بنفس الوقت لا نجد من الجانب الإيراني تدخل أو وصاية أو فرض لقرار أو توجه. كل ما هنالك لوصف طبيعي لطبيعة هذه العلاقة، إيران دولة جارة، ولدينا من المشتركات السياسية والدينية والثقافية والاجتماعية التاريخية من مصلحتنا أن تكون العلاقة متميزة بحكم طبيعة العملية السياسية. قبل 2003 وبعد 2003 هناك علاقة إيجابية مع كافة القوى السياسية ومن كل المكونات، كما هي العلاقة سياسية متميزة مع كثير من دول المنطقة، وهذا عامل إيجابي. أما أن يكون التدخل بالطريقة التي تؤثر على أمن الدولة والتحكم بمؤسساتها فهذا بالتأكيد غير موجود، وهو أصلا غير مقبول. الكل حريص، كل العناوين مهما تباينت التسميات للمجاميع للفصائل للجهات السياسية، الكل حريص على استقلالية القرار الوطني العراقي.
So one of the challenges you're facing is balancing the demands of those pro-Iranian groups, which helped bring you to power, while improving relations with Sunni Arab states, particularly in the Gulf. Do you have any reason to believe that the recent agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which Iraq apparently played a part in, will that change the dynamic in the region?
إذا أمكن تعيدين السؤال، لأن أنا سمعت موازنة مجاميع مسلحة السعودية وإيران. ممكن تفكك لي هذا؟
Yeah. I guess let me try to make the question more simple. There's a recent agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Apparently, Iraq played a role. you're in one of the most complicated positions, right? You've been brought to power with the help of pro-Iran groups, but you also have to balance that you want to improve relations with these Sunni Arab countries. Do you believe this agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, will that help?
أعتقد قد أجبت عن طبيعة العلاقة بين العراق وإيران. قضية الاتفاق الأخير بين السعودية وإيران بالتأكيد هذا مرحب به وأعلنا بشكل رسمي، والعراق بحكوماتهم منذ حكومة السيد عادل عبد المهدي وحكومة السيد الكاظمي وحكومتنا استمرنا بمنهج تقريب وجهات النظر بين البلدين وإزالة كل المخاوف وبؤر الاختلاف وعدم التفاهم. دولتين مهمتين في المنطقة، علاقات طيبة قطعا تنعكس بشكل إيجابي على استقرار المنطقة، تصب بخدمة توجهنا لخلق هذه الشراكات الاقتصادية. موقع العراق الجغرافي مع دول المنطقة ما موجود من ثروات، من مزايا، من فرص ممكن أن يؤهل لنوع من التكامل الاقتصادي في المنطقة ينعكس على استقرارها وازدهارها.
Okay, wonderful. I think we have time for just two very quick questions. One of them is, you repeatedly mentioned in your remarks the diversity of Iraq and also Iraqi minorities. There have been recent developments that have some of the minorities feeling threatened and feeling like this is becoming a more religiously conservative country and that perhaps there's no room for those minorities. How do you feel about that fear?
وجود الأقليات والمكونات الكريمة في العراق ضمن هذا التنوع بتقديري هو عامل قوة، وهم جزء أصيل من المجتمع، لهم إسهامات في بناء الدولة العراقية، وللأسف تعرضوا لأبشع الانتهاكات من قبل داعش الإرهابية. كلنا يستذكر ما حصل في سنجار وضد الأيزيديين والمسيحيين والتركمان والشبك من اضطهاد من هذه المجاميع الإرهابية، ونجد من الالتزام الشرعي والوطني والأخلاقي أن ننصف هذه المكونات بالرعاية والاهتمام. في حكومتنا تبنينا إنشاء صندوق لدعم المناطق في سنجار وكذلك في سهل نينوى، وخصصنا مبلغ 50 مليار دينار. بالتأكيد المهمة الأكبر المحافظة على حقوق هذه المكونات وعدم المساس بها وفق مبدأ الديمقراطية، وهو مبدأ دستوري أقر والتزم به كل أبناء الشعب العراقي، وسوف تمارس الحكومة واجباتها بالحفاظ على هذه الحقوق وضمان تمكين هذه الأقليات من ممارسة حقوقها.
And just one final question on, let's ask you about climate change. You've unveiled a program about climate change that you touched on briefly in your presentation, and you've said in the past that one of the risks of climate change is not just displacement, food security, it has security implications. What is at stake here? What happens if climate change is not addressed properly, particularly in terms of security?
بدءا الحديث عن تهديد المناخ والتغييرات المناخية في العراق ليس حديث ترفي أو كمالي. فعلا هناك تهديد وجودي، كون مجموعة مشاكل تزامنت في وقت واحد. اليوم لدينا شحة في المياه في نهري دجلة والفرات، لدينا زيادة في نسبة التصحر، لدينا مشاكل في معالجة مياه الصرف الصحي، لدينا مساحات للأسف بدأت تقل بشكل كبير المساحات الخضراء، والمشكلة الأهم هذا الغاز المصاحب لإنتاج النفط والذي يحرق ويسبب الكثير من الانبعاثات انبعاثات الغازات الدفيئة التي تؤثر على ظاهرة الاحتباس الحراري. أمام هذه المشاكل والتحديات الخطيرة لابد أن يكون هناك برامج وعمل حثيث من قبل الدولة. بالتأكيد المجتمع الدولي مطالب بمؤسساته منظماته أن يناصر ويساعد العراق في جهوده لمواجهة ومعالجة هذه التحديات. في الأسبوع الماضي كان لدينا مؤتمر هو الأول في البصرة، وضم مجموعة من المختصين والباحثين والسفراء بعثة الأمم المتحدة في بغداد، ومن المؤمل أن نعقد في نفس هذا العام مؤتمر دولي يضم الدول الإقليمية لمواجهة هذه الظاهرة.
Wonderful. Prime Minister Sudani, thank you so much for speaking with us. It's been wonderful having you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, and thank you both for that conversation. It's now our great honor, on behalf of the university, to welcome to the podium Kurdistan Region President, His Excellency Niyazov Barzani.
You have to get ready. Yes. Amadaboni Bares. Yes, exactly. Waiting. Bares, جنابي سروك وزيران العراق. Bares, جنابي سروكي دستحلاتي دادوری عراق. بیانی تان باش. بخیر هاتنتان دکم سپاسی برای برزم دکتر برهم صالح و سروکایتی زانکوی امریکا لعراق سلیمانی دکم بو درێژەدان بە بەستنی دیداری ساڵانەی سلێمانی لە یادی تاوانی کیمیابارانی حەلەبجەدا سەری ڕێز لە بەردەمگیانی پاکی شەهیدانی حەلەبجەدا دەنوێنین هەموومان قەرزداری قوربانیانی خەڵکی هەڵەبجەین ساڵانێک بوو کارێکی زۆرمان کرد بۆ کردنی هەڵەبجە بە پارێزگا بۆ ئەوەی قەرەبوو بکرێتەوە و خزمەتی خەڵکەکەی بکرێت بە ناوی خەڵکی هەڵەبجە و تەواوی هەرێمی کوردستانەوە سوپاسێکی تایبەتی برای بەڕێزم محەممەد شیاع سودانی سەرۆک وەزیرانی فدرالی عێراق دەکەم کە زۆر دڵسۆزانە کاری کرد بۆ تەواوکردنی ڕێکارەکان هەروەها سوپاسی هەموو ئەوانەی پێشتریش لە هەرێمی کوردستان و عێراق دەکەم کە کاریان کردووە بۆ ئەوەی هەڵەبجە ببێتە پارێزگای 19هەمی عێراق داوا لە حکوومەتی فدرال دەکەم بودجەیەکی تایبەتی تەرخان بکەن بۆ ئاوادانکردنەوەی هەڵەبجە و قەرەبووکردنەوەی کەسوکاری قوربانیان و برینداران هەوڵەکانی حکوومەتی فدرالی و بەڕێز سەرۆک وەزیرانی عێراق بۆ بایاخدان بە هەڵەبجە و قەرەبووکردنەوەی زیان لێکەوتوانی هەنگاوێکی دەستوری و پاڵپشتکراوە بە بڕیارەکانی دادگا بەرامبەر بە تاوانی ڕژێمی پێشووی عێراق ئەوە کارێکی تەواو دەستوری و یاساییە کە بۆ خەڵکی هەڵەبجە بکرێت بەڕێزان ئامادەبوانی بەڕێز ئێمە لە هەرێمی کوردستان بە تەواوی
پشتیوانی لحکومت و هنگاوکانی بەڕێز سەرۆک وەزیرانی فدرالی عێراق دەکەین لەو کاتەیەوە کە دەستی بەکار کردووە لەسەر بنەمای ڕێککەوتنی هاوپەیمانی بەڕێوەبردنی دەوڵەت بۆ پێکهێنانی حکوومەت وەک نەقشە ڕێگایەک هەوڵی داوە دۆخی ئارامی سیاسی لە عێراق دروست بکات. هەروەها بایەخی بە هەموو ناوچە و پێکهاتەکانی عێراق داوە و ڕێککەوتن و هیوادارین ئەو ڕێککەوتن و یاسایانەش جێبەجێ بکات. ئەو ڕێککەوتنەی لە چوارچێوەی پرۆژەی یاسای بودجەدا کرا بۆ هەموو عێراق و بە هەرێمی کوردستانیشەوە کارێکی زۆر باش و جێگەی دەستخۆشیە بۆ حکوومەتی فدرالی عێراق و حکوومەتی هەرێمی کوردستان. چاوەڕێین ئەو ئاراستەیە بەردەوام بێت و یاسای نەوت و غازیش بە هەمان گیانی هاوکاری هەردوولا دەربچێت. ئامادەبوانی بەڕێز 20 ساڵ بەسەر پرۆسەی ئازادی عێراق تێپەڕی و ئەم دیدارە دەرفەتێکی باشە بۆ هەڵسەنگاندنێکی گرنگ کە سوودی هەبێ بۆ داهاتوو. بەڵام زۆر گرنگە هەڵسەنگاندن دوور بێت لە تۆمەتبارکردنی یەکتر لەسەر شکستەکان، چونکە ئەمە شێوازێکی بەسوود نییە و هەمومان لە شکستەکاندا بەشدارین. هەمووشمان پێکەوە لە سەرکەوتنەکاندا بەشدارین. زۆر بن ئەو سەرکەوتن و شکستانە یاخۆت کەم بن. 20 ساڵی ڕابردوو وێڕای هەموو کەم و کوڕیەکان جیاواز بوو لە سەردەمی دیکتاتۆری. لایەنی کەم خەڵکی عێراق ئازادی بەکارهێنا بۆ نیشاننانەوەی زیندویەتی خۆی لە ناوچەکە. قۆناغی ئۆپۆزیسیۆنی عێراقی هەر لە کۆنگرەی لەندەن و سەلاحەددینەوە تاک و دامەزراندنی ئەنجومەنی حکم و نووسینەوەی دەستور سەرکەوتوو بوو. بەڵام دوای ئەوە لادان و هەوڵەکان وردە وردە دەستیان پێکرد و بوونە تەنگەژەی گەورە. ئەوەش بەهۆی نەمانی گفتوگۆی بنیادنەری لایەنەکان و جێبەجێ نەکردنی دەستوری عێراقی. ئامانجی عێراقیەکان لە دروستکردنی عێراقێکی دیموکراتی، فرەیی، مەدەنی و سەقامگیر تووشی شکستێکی گەورە بوو. لەبەر ئەوە بەشداری خەڵک لە پرۆسەی دیموکراسیدا زۆر کەم بووەوە. ئەمەش کاریگەریەکی زۆر مەترسیداری هەیە بۆ سەر داهاتووی پرۆسەی دیموکراسی، بە تایبەتی کە عێراق لە ڕابردوودا ملیۆنان کەس و ملیاردها دۆلاری بەهۆی دیکتاتۆرەوە لە دەستدا و دەیان ساڵی تەمەنی نەوەکانی خستە ناو تند و توژی و جەنگەوە. کۆمەڵگەی مەدەنی و مافە مەدەنیەکانی خەڵک و ژنان بە تایبەتی زیانێکی گەورەیان لێدرا. ئەمە جارێکی دیکە ڕێگریەکی گەورەی دروست کرد لە بەردەم پێشکەوتنی کۆمەڵایەتی و ژیانێکی سەردەمیانە لە عێراق. ئەمە زیانێکی زۆری بە توانای دەستپێشخەری و داهێنانی عێراقیەکان کرد. دڵنیاتان دەکەمەوە ئەگەر مافە مەدەنیەکان بە شێوەیەکی چاوەڕوانکراو وەک ئەوەی لە دەستوردا هەیە بۆ خەڵکی عێراق دەستەبەر کرابە، ئێستا کۆمەلگایەکی زۆر داهێنەرمان دەبوو، کۆمەلگایەکی کامەرانمان لە عێراق دەبینی. زۆربوونی ناوەندی بڕیار، بەکارهێنانی چەکی دەوڵەت لە ناکۆکی سیاسی ناوخۆ، شکاندنی باوەری پێکهاتەکانی عێراق لە یەکسانی و بەشداری و هاوبەشی لە بڕیار و بەڕێوەبردنی وڵاتدا زیانێکی یەکجار زۆری بە پرۆسەی سیاسی و دامەزراوەکانی عێراق گەیاندووە. ئەوانەی دەستوریان نووسیوە سەر بە باوەڕ و نەتەوە و پێکهاتە جیاوازەکانی عێراق بوون. تەواوی داوای هەمووان لە دەستوردا نەنووسراوە و نەچەسپێنراوە، بەڵام هەموویان لەو باوەڕەدا بوون دەستورێکی باشیان نووسیوە. کە دەتوانێت عێراق بکات بە وڵاتێکی هەموان و بیکاتە عێراقێکی فدرالی و دیموکراسی و پێشکەوتوو. بەداخەوە دەستور جێبەجێ نەکرا. ساڵی 2017 لە هەرێمی کوردستان لیژنەیەکی پسپۆر 57 مادەی دەستوری پەیوەست بە سیستەمی فدرالی و مافەکانی هەرێمی کوردستانی دەست نیشان کرد کە حتا ئێستاش جێبەجێ نەکراون. بەو هۆیەوە خەڵکی کوردستان حەست ناکەن سیستەمی فدرالی عێراق جێبەجێ کرابێت. ئەگەر فدرالی بە پێی دەستور جێبەجێ بکرابە، خەڵکی هەرێمی کوردستان و هەموو عێراق ئێستا هەستیان بە یەکسانی و هاوبەشیەکی ڕاستەقینە دەکرد. زۆر کەس هەرێمی کوردستان بە جێبەجێ نەکردنی دەستور تۆمەتبار دەکەن. دوای 20 ساڵ ناڵێن ئێمە لە هەرێمی کوردستان بێهەڵە بووین. هەمومان لە عێراق هەڵەمان کردووە. بەڵام دەبێ سوود لە هەڵەکانی ڕابردوو وەربگرین. سەرۆک مەسعود بارزانی و خوالی خۆشبوو سەرۆک مامجەلال تاالبانی زۆر هەوڵیاندا بۆ جێبەجێکردنی دەستور. سەرۆک بارزانی چەندین جار خوشداریدا کە دەستور وەلان راوە و ئەمە عێراق تێک دەدات. سەرکردایەتی هەرێمی کوردستان هەستیان بە پرپرسیارەتێکی زۆر دەکرد بۆ جێبەجێکردنی دەستور وەک وەفاداریەک بۆ هەموو پێکهاتەکانی عێراق. ئێستاش ئامادەی هەموو شتێکین بۆ ڕاستکردنەوەی دەستور. دوای 20 ساڵ دەبێ هەمومان بە بەرپرسیارەتی هاوبەش هەڵبگرین و چارەسەرێکی مامناوەندی وا بدۆزینەوە کە هەموو لەم وڵاتەدا خۆیان بە سەرکەوتوو بزانن لە پرۆسەی سیاسیدا. بەڕێزان، گۆڕانی کەش و هەوا تا ساڵی 2050 دەبێتە هۆی ملیارێک و 200 ملیۆن کەس ناچار بن لە شوێنەکانیان کۆچ بکەن. بەداخەوە بە پێی لێکۆڵینەوەی بانکی جیهانی و نەتەوە یەکگرتووەکان، عێراق یەک لەو 5 وڵاتەیە کە زۆرترین کاریگەری لەسەر دەبێت. ئەمە بابەتێکی زۆر جددی و ژیاریە. دەبێت گفتوگۆی نێوانمان زۆر بکات بۆ دویزینەوەی چارەسەر. دەبێت گفتوگۆی زۆر لەگەڵ وڵاتانی ناوچەکە بکەین، بە تایبەتی تورکیا و ئێران بۆ کەمکردنەوەی زیانەکانی ئەم گۆڕانە و کەم ئاوی لەسەر عێراق. کۆنفرانسی هەفتەی ڕابردوو لە بەسڕە و پشتگیری نەتەوە یەکگرتوەکان و وڵاتانی دۆست لە بەرنامە و هەنگاوەکانی عێراق مایەی خۆشحاڵیە. مەترسیەکی دیکە لە عێراق پشتبەستنە بە نەوت وەکو سەرچاوەی سەرەکی داهات. بەهۆی گۆڕانی گەش و هەواوە هەوڵە خێراکانی گۆڕینی سەرچاوەکانی وزە و شێوەی ژیان لە جیهان، ژیانی خەڵکی عێراق لە داهاتوودا دەکەوێتە ژێر مەترسیەکی یەکجار گەورەوە. بە تایبەتیش کە ژمارەی دانیشتوانی زۆر گەورە دەبێت و زیادبوونی بەشی بەکارخستن لە بودجەدا ئەرکی حکوومەتی فدرالی زۆر قورس کردووە. عێراق پێویستی بە پلانێکی ئستراتیجی و پرۆژەی زۆر و جیاوازە. دەبێ پارەیەکی زۆر لە پرۆژەی ئستراتیجی خەرج بکات بۆ ئەوەی وڵاتەکە بە سەلامەتی بۆ ژیان بمێنێتەوە. بەڵام خەرجکردنی داهات لە موچە کە ئەویش بەشە هەرە زۆری بۆ کڕینی پێداویستیەکان دەچێتە دەرەوە، وا دەکات مەترسیەکان زیاتر بێت. ئامادەبوانی بەڕێز، عێراق خاوەن دەوڵەمەندیەکی گەورەی مرۆیی و سروشتیە. دەکرێت بە باشترین شێوە بقۆزرێتەوە تا ببێتە یەکێک لە وڵاتە پێشکەوتوەکان و شوێنی و پێگەی شایستەی خۆی لە ناوچەکە و لە جیهانیش وەربگرێت. ببێتە یاریکەرێکی دیار کە ڕۆڵی کاریگەر لە چەسپاندنی ئارامی و سەقامگیری و ئاشتیدا بگێڕێت و ببێتە ناوەندی بەرچاوی ناوچەکە. بۆ عێراقێکی ئاوها کە دەمانەوێ، دەبێ عێراقیەکان بە هەموو پێکهاتەکانەوە پێکەوە کار بکەن بەرپرسیارەتی هاوبەش هەڵبگرن ئامانج و ئەجێندایەکی کۆکەرەوەی نیشتیمانی عێراقی کە بەرژەوەندی باڵای وڵات بپارێزێ هەمومان کۆبکاتەوە. هەموو پێکهاتەکان لە حنەتەوە و ئاین و مەزهەبێک بن دەبێ هەست بکەن عێراق وڵاتی خۆیانە. دەبێ هەمومان پێکەوە کار بکەین بۆ ئەوەی لە عێراق ئەجێندای عێراق سەرکەوێت. ئێرادە و بڕیار و سەروەری عێراق و عێراقیەکان پارێزراو بێت. لە دۆخی ئێستای سیاسی و ئەمنی و ئابووری ناوچەکەدا و جیهاندا عێراق بە هەرێمی کوردستانیشەوە لەگەڵ تەحەدی و دەرفەتی گەورەدا ڕوبەڕووە. ئێستا کاتی گفتوگۆیەکی ڕاشکاوانە و ئازایانەیە. کاتی ئەوەیە لە عێراق پێکەوە هەمومان بەڕوانگەیەکی هاوبەشەوە سەیری داهاتووی ئەم وڵاتە بکەین. بە پێکەوە کارکردن و تەبایی و یەکڕیزی بە هاوکاری و بەرپرسیارەتی هاوبەش دەتوانین هەموو سەختی و تەحەدیەکان تێپەڕێنین. دەرفەتەکانیش بۆ ئێستا و بنیادنانی داهاتوویەکی باشتر وڵاتێکی بەهێز و پێشکەوتوو بخۆزینەوە. لە هەرێمی کوردستانیش دەبێ بەگیانی یەکڕیزی و تەبایی و پێکەوەیی کێشە و ناکۆکیەکان چارەسەر بکەین. لەم بارەیەوە هەوڵ و هەنگاوەکانی لایەنە سیاسیەکان بۆ نەهێشتنی تەگەرەکانی بەردەم هەڵبژاردن دڵخۆشکەرن. ئێمە لە سەرۆکایەتی هەرێمی کوردستان لە کار و هەوڵەکانمان بەردەوام دەبین بۆ تێپەڕاندنی کێشە و ناکۆکیەکان پێکەوە کار دەکەین بۆ ئەوەی وادەی هەڵبژاردن دیاری بکەین و پرۆسەکە لە کاتی خۆیدا بەڕێوە بچێت. جارێکی تر لە سلێمانیەوە بە خێرهاتنی هەموو لایەکتان دەکەم و زۆر سوپاس.
Thank you, President Barzani. Distinguished guests, please join me in welcoming the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Iraq and Head of the United Nations Assistant Mission for Iraq, Her Excellency Jénين Blaskhart.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, or afternoon perhaps already. Now, participating in this forum 4 years ago, in March 2019, I kicked off by saying that I would speak candidly and in a thought-provoking way, so that we could attempt to honestly and constructively address some of the deep-rooted problems in Iraqi processes and institutions. If you allow me, I will do so again today. Now, at the time, I said that only by focusing on the systemic concerns would it be possible to revive public trust. I warned that simmering anger boils over easily and that failure to act would inevitably lead to a new cycle of violence. Now, what happened after, and where are things today? Of course, all of us will recall the mass demonstrations in October of that same year. Many Iraqis from all walks of life took to the streets, protesting a lack of economic, social, and political prospects, tired of corruption and partisan interests, after 16 years simply done with undelivered promises. What they were asking for, a country capable of reaching its full potential for the benefit of all Iraqis. The rest is history. The heavy loss of life, as well as the many injuries, combined with a lack of accountability and the hijacking of peaceful protests by all manner of power dynamics, resulted in the rapid extension of an already huge crisis of confidence. Long story short, these events, as we all know, led to the Prime Minister's resignation, the confirmation of a new government, and importantly, the holding of early parliamentary elections 2 years later in October 2021. And while these elections were widely recognized as transparent and credible, which is no small feat for a young democracy, soon after, Iraq found itself in an extremely volatile and politically charged post-electoral environment. Calls for parties to overcome their differences went unheeded, and with tensions on the rise for months, one did not need a crystal ball to see where this would lead to. A situation that resulted in armed clashes in the heart of the capital and elsewhere. But at last, in October 2022, after more than a year of discord and power play, the Council of Representatives confirmed Iraq's new government under the leadership of Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani. It was about time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, looking back at my quarterly briefings to the UN Security Council over the past 4 years, it is undoubtedly clear. Political, security, economic, environmental, and institutional challenges have by and large remained consistent. Now, what does that mean? It means that many of the aspirations and demands that came to the fore in October 2019, they are still alive. It means that band-aid solutions do not work. It also means that political inaction must be put behind us. It moreover means that the patience and resilience of Iraqis will continue to be tested. Why? Because no one can expect the new government, this government, to accomplish miracles overnight, dealing with both the enormous legacy of Iraq's past and the many challenges of the present. It will take time. Certainly, Iraq has overcome some of the key short-term impediments it was facing immediately after the removal of Saddam Hussein. But since then, the country has grappled with a plethora of destabilizing events and trends, both domestic and external. From deadly sectarian violence, the fight against Daesh, armed groups operating outside state control, various external power competitions, to COVID-19, significant environmental challenges, and the adverse effects of climate change, to name but a few. Now, these events of the past 20 years did not only compound existing fragilities inherited from the previous decades, they also exposed new weaknesses. In other words, while Iraq throughout its history has navigated some very dark and difficult times, drivers of instability in the country's more recent past remain to a large extent the same, resulting in a pattern of recurring crises. And these include, inter alia, systemic corruption, weak governance, poor service delivery, unemployment, and an over-reliance on oil, all of which in turn impact the everyday Iraqi citizen, feed into the public grievances, and exacerbate tensions within and between communities. Now, that said, we also know that out of any crisis, new opportunities can emerge. And let me emphasize this before anyone gets the impression that Iraq is a lost cause. It is not. Iraq has immense potential, and painting a crescendo of doom is not my objective here, not at all. So let me underline once more. The recent confirmation of Iraq's new government under the leadership of Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, it provides a crucial window of opportunity, an opportunity to steer the country back onto the course of stability. In my most recent briefing to the UN Security Council in early February, I mentioned that Iraq's government had shown its resolve to tackle a number of pressing issues. Yet it is, of course, still early days, and I can therefore only again emphasize that any government needs time to get things done. Also, for any government to achieve meaningful progress, broad support, be it from within or outside the coalition, is a prerequisite. It is quite simple. The kind of in-depth change that is needed now requires relentless commitment from a wide range of actors. And absolutely, it also requires placing the national interest above all else. Now, in turn, the Iraqi people need to see that slowly but surely, progress is being achieved for all Iraqis, and that includes women, minorities, and young people. They need to see that inclusivity and equality are not mere words and speeches, but are dealt with as absolute essentials. They need to see that civic space is not being restricted, but given room to flourish, thereby guaranteeing the freedom of expression. They need to see that justice and accountability are ensured for all, regardless of affiliation or background. And they need to see that creating a conducive and all-in environment is at the core of any policy or piece of legislation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, with Iraq's long list of outstanding business on everyone's mind, it is important to focus, to not get distracted or create new and unnecessary headaches for the government. In other words, to break with the cycles of instability, what must the priorities be? What is the potential impact of a certain law or regulation? Also, could it be controversial or divisive? Could it antagonize communities? And if so, what does that mean for the broad support desperately needed now? So be it possible changes to existing laws, the entering into force of a ban, or potential limitations to rights and freedoms. Ignoring the wider impact is risky business. So at all times, the question must be, is it truly worth the time and effort, or will the sum of such issues at a certain point be greater than the whole of its parts, thereby again distracting too many people from the key priorities, even estranging them? That said, ladies and gentlemen, let me go back to the long list of pressing issues. I will name just a few. First and foremost, the 2023 federal budget. The Prime Minister explained already. It has been passed by the Council of Ministers, and that is truly good news. Yet it is, of course, still to be passed by Parliament. And clearly, without a budget passed by Parliament, much of the implementation of the government program will be held back, including public service delivery. Also, and importantly, high oil prices cannot keep the country afloat. Similarly, creating jobs sustainably cannot be achieved by further ballooning the public sector. Economic and financial reforms are desperately needed. Efforts to combat Iraq's systemic corruption need to go beyond individuals or events. The system that was built after 2003 is simply untenable, and if left as is, it will yet again backfire. Additionally, the many outstanding issues between Baghdad and Erbil, they call for institutionalized relations. In the absence thereof, little will improve, but not all. And there too, I could go on. But to again cut a long story short, in my address to you here in Suli back in 2019, I depicted a landscape marred by factional politics, non-state actors, distortion of state resources, poor services, and a lack of jobs. And now, 4 years later, many of these issues remain sorely acute. What I am essentially saying is there is no time to lose. And definitely, the challenges ahead are manifold. It would be naive to think that the legacy of past hardships and newly emerging threats will not continue to test the country's resilience. And yes, as any other country, Iraq will be put to the test sooner or later. But the fear is that without prompt action, Iraq will flunk this test. Hence, it is important to anchor the country in the stability it needs to withstand future shocks. And for that to happen, we must collectively learn from history, and recent history at that, to avoid repeating it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, my remarks today focus on Iraq in its entirety, but the political infighting and parties' vested interest in the Kurdistan region cannot be left unmentioned. Participating in an event at the University of Kurdistan almost 2 years ago in May 2021, I concluded my remarks by stating that the Kurdistan region has a choice. It can unite, tackle systemic corruption, further strengthen its respect for fundamental rights and freedoms, make meaningful progress on security and economic reform, and engage in dialogue despite internal differences that at times, I admit, seem insurmountable. Or it can fail to put its house in order, risking what it has achieved in past decades. And it pains me to say it, but so many people are wondering, what wake-up call are the Kurdistan region parties waiting for? In closing, ladies and gentlemen, let me emphasize, it is our sincere hope that relying on its immense wealth, diversity, opportunities, and potential, Iraq will now be able, and thus be enabled, to successfully move ahead. After 20 years, the country deserves to rise above endless cycles of instability and fragility. Iraqis are very much aware of the life that was promised after Saddam, and 2 decades on, they deserve better. It is as simple as that. And collectively, I am convinced that it is still possible to usher in that promised future. Thank you very much.
Please remain in your seats. The session will begin momentarily. Distinguished guests, please remain in your seats. The session will begin momentarily. The next session will start in just a few minutes. No. If our panelists please can make their way to the stage, please. Esteemed guests, please take your seats. We will begin shortly.
يعني خبر انت شو بيصير؟ زين شو تقررين؟ ما غدا؟
But I'm trying to locate her.
Well, we need to find her.
I have her number.
I don't want to make an announcement because I don't want the rest to feel like we're going to put one of our guys. We'll just start without her, okay? And she'll get here when she gets here.
It looks like they're ready.
Yeah, let's get going. We're waiting for, we're going to just say we're going to get started while we're waiting for one panelist, okay?
We will begin the next session in 1 minute. Please. Please take your seats. We will begin the next session in 1 minute.
Let's just get started.
Can you just see if I see it then? Okay. Off.
You say we're going to get started and our remaining panelists will join in a second.
We will go ahead and get started. Our remaining panelists will join us shortly.
No matter at all.
Thank you, everyone.
But at this point, Jenny.
This upcoming panel is entitled Geopolitics, Iraq, MENA, and the Changing Role of the International Community. It is moderated by Dr. Joost Hilterman of the International Crisis Group, who will introduce the panel. Go ahead, Dr.
Just checking whether this is, yes, it's on now, isn't it? Hello, good morning, everyone. We would like to get started. خلينا نبدأ حاليا. شكرا. صباح الخير. صباح الفل. يعني, okay. Okay, as I said, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Barham, where he is. I want to thank him. And here is Elena. I want to thank Dr. Barham for his hospitality once again. We missed very much the Suleymaniyah Forum during COVID and directly afterwards, so we're delighted that you are resuming and you have the ability to bring together very prominent people from Iraq and outside the country. And so the audience is highly mixed, which is a great advantage to all of us. This panel, however, consists of people not from Iraq, and that is important as well, because that suggests that we are going to look from the outside in, rather than from the inside out. And so we have here a number of prominent people and analysts who will provide their thoughts about the situation in Iraq as seen from the outside and in the context of the region. As you know, the situation in the region and in the world is becoming extraordinarily dangerous at this stage. You saw the incident between the Russian plane and the American drone over the Black Sea. Interestingly, the situation in Iraq is relatively calm and stable, which is a great thing, but it could be deceptive, and I think we've already heard from Jeanine Blasgaard that there are still many things to be concerned about. So I want to first introduce the panelists. Next to me is Her Excellency Anna Linde from Sweden, who was foreign minister until 5 months ago. Now she is with us, but her government has changed rather significantly, but that means you can speak very freely, I hope. Next to her, we have Peter Bergen from the United States, from the New America Foundation, who will give us some analysis, also maybe from a somewhat American perspective, but of course there are many American perspectives. So again, feel free to go whichever way you want. His Excellency Nikolai Mladenov, whom many of you know because he was the head of UNAMI here in Iraq for some time and then became special coordinator for the Middle East peace process, which is the kind of job that if you survive it politically, then you can take on just about anything in the world. Then we have Ra'ad al-Qadri. Ra'ad and I met in Baghdad in April 2003 for the first time. I never let go of him after that because he is one of the best analysts, if not the best analyst. I have to be careful because there are a couple of others in the audience who may kill me. The analyst on Iraq, and I'm so pleased to be able to be on this panel with him. And then we have Elena Suponina, whom I have also known for quite some time, and whose views I would look very much forward to. She is an advisor to the Russian International Affairs Council, with which we've had a strong relationship in the past, and we hope to continue it despite the very difficult circumstances that we face in the world right now involving Russia, Ukraine, and the West, and China. So without further ado, I want to ask Her Excellency Anne Linde to talk a little bit about the regional situation and especially her view of what the West, broadly speaking, the United States and Europe, how their position in the Middle East has shifted from where it was before, where there was a certain bond that was very active, to something that is, I guess, less than that. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Jose, and thank you very much. I'm very happy to be invited. I'm so happy to see my friend, former President Barham Salih, and also Mr. Barzani, the President of the region, and my former colleague. We worked a lot together with difficult issues, so I'm so happy to be here. Well, anyway, I should talk a little about changing role of the international community when it comes to Iraq and the broader Middle East. And from the 2003, as we said, to present. And in just roughly 6 minutes, it's quite a big topic, but still, just to put out some thoughts. There has been so many changes since this period, and the invasion in 2003 by the United States and its allies, of course, made a significant turning point in the region. The intervention led to the ousting of Saddam Hussein, but also the subsequent establishment of a democratic government in Iraq. However, the US-led occupation was also met with resistance, leading to a long and protracted conflict that lasted over a decade. The situation in Iraq deteriorated rapidly, and that led to the rise of ISIS-Daesh and the subsequent international military intervention to combat the group. As a foreign minister, I took part in several meetings with the coalition against Daesh. It was an unusually big group that finally was what was needed to, together with the Kurdish forces in Syria and Iraq, push back Daesh. Of course, the Peshmerga forces has played an immense role, and I always want to underline that. Not the least now when, as many of you know, we have intense discussion with Turkey. It's important to underline how important the Kurdish forces has been in this when it comes to this. But the fact that tens of thousands of ISIS-Daesh prisoners and their families are still in detention in Syria and Iraq, and that they are guarded mainly by Kurdish forces. And when I visited Baghdad in 1.5 years ago, the forces, the NATO forces who were still there, said that this is like ISIS 2.0 that is growing in those camps. And still, this will actually mean that the relation between European and other countries who has people there will actually be very important. We took back about 40 women and children. I was very involved in that. It was extremely difficult. I had to send 8 missions with diplomats down, and we have difficult negotiation with the Kurdish authorities. It led to good result, but it was not easy, I have to say. And this is still in many of the European governments' head, and when we discuss it among foreign ministers, I feel that. The group of Al-Qaeda and ISIS-inspired groups is still a significant threat to the region and also to other countries, and that will form our relation. The Arab Spring, of course, in 2011 marked a significant turning point in MENA. Many of us believed that would be very good. I was myself sleeping in a tent in the Tahrir Square, and we believed so much in Tunisia. And now it's going in the wrong direction, even in Tunisia. And people are seeing this, okay, so democracy is not for this region, and I don't accept that. Of course, democracy, transparency, anti-corruption is for this region as well. But people think they see something else. I've been very engaged in Yemen, and I think still I'm the only EU foreign minister who has paid 2 full-day visits there. And the discussion between Saudi Arabia and Iran on this issue is, of course, something that is also very important for the region. I think that now what we have to say is that the recent years, the region has been overshadowed by other international development, such as the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, but also now the terrible, unjust, illegal, against all humanitarian and international law invasion by Russia on the friendly neighboring country of Ukraine. That is the most and absolutely most important issue in the Western countries right now. It has destroyed the European security order, and I, as a president of the Organization for European Security and Cooperation in Europe for 2021, knows how much this has destroyed. I want to say a few words about the economic development, because the region, and as we heard, as Janine said, the corruption and bureaucracy is a great problem. And the fact is, and to be blunt, the region has little to offer than oil. And now, of course, China and India is buying a lot of oil, but the United States is not buying any oil anymore. And Europe is getting the green transition very, very rapidly. So where will you be in 30 years if you don't diversify? If you don't diversify, the situation in 20, 30 years will look very grim. I'm sorry to say, but I think so. One country that has seen that is Saudi Arabia. They have their Vision 2030, and they have started to have a lot of solar energy and changes. They have a lot of changes when it comes to social and civil liberties, unfortunately not when it comes to human and civil rights. The Saudi Public Investment Fund also established its funds channeling 24 billion toward Egypt, Oman, Iraq, Jordan, Sudan, and Bahrain. And that is the clearest indication how they will use their soft power in the region. And now we see how China has used their interest in being the country that has broken the diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran. We may see a shift in US and Europe priorities. The US has historically been involved in the union, in the region, but now the Biden administration has said, well, we don't need their oil anymore, and we need to focus on the main issue for us, Taiwan and China. And we can see this shift And I think Europe has to take up a greater responsibility for the contacts when US is going back. So in conclusion, the role of the international community in Iraq and the broader MENA region has evolved significantly over the past 2 decades. While the region may no longer be the focus of attention that it once was, it remains strategically important for a number of reasons. The next chapter of international engagement is likely to focus on counterterrorism, economic development, and multilateral cooperation, and there might be a shift between US and EU involvement. But we must work together to address these challenges, and I think that we should have much greater cooperation between the EU countries and the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I may come back to you later with a question about the green transition and what that actually means for relations between Europe and countries like Iraq. But I need to give others on the panel a chance, and I want to move to His Excellency Nikolai Mladenov. I don't have a specific question for you because you've played, of course, you were Prime Minister of Bulgaria, Foreign Minister. Well, you've have played a major role in the United Nations. You've seen the world, as I said earlier, Israel, Palestine. So from your perspective, looking at the region, what do you think we can do as international community? And this, I take this term very loosely because the international community is loose. What can we do to bring down the temperature and to find a better way forward?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. And let me first pay tribute to President Barham Saleh for bringing us together again after COVID. And I do hope that everyone in this room realizes that something quite unique is happening today. Something really unique is happening in this forum right at this moment. We have the President of the Kurdistan region and the Prime Minister of Iraq talking about something that President Barham was a lonely voice for many years on, and that is Iraq's climate change challenges. And they speak with passion of the need for this country to come together with its diversity, with its youth, with its resources to tackle the problems of the future. This is a unique moment, I think, for all of us who have been involved with Iraq's transition since 2003. And the fact that today we hear good news, we discuss good news, budgets, new ideas, new initiatives, is really a turning point in the history of this country. And I do hope that the international community will realize that its responsibility from now going forward is to support Iraq, to support the leaders of Iraq in resolving their own problems, not solving their problems for them. Because this is where things change. Iraq for many years has gotten too used to foreigners, and with all due respect, I've been one of them in my role as UNAMI and America and others, mediating and solving problems. Now I think Iraq has the unique opportunity to work on its own. Because what we see today is a determination by the Prime Minister, by the leadership of the country, to really tackle the challenges of the day. And we see a regional environment which actually has called on everyone in the Middle East no longer to rely on the outside world as much as they have relied in the past, to make sure that the countries in the region have their own capabilities and their own capacities, their own skilled labor force, their skilled intellectual capacity to really work on their own security, their policies, and their leadership. And I think this change is really the change that everybody was looking for when Saddam Hussein was ousted out of power. We were all, in fact, in that long, many years ago, in 2003, hoping for democracy in Iraq, but really hoping for an Iraq and for a region that is actually less reliant on the world and more focused on working forward on its own problems. And today, I think after many of the discussions that we heard this morning, the fact that the Prime Minister recognizes Iraq's diversity and talks about, and both the president and the prime minister talk about the resources that the country has beyond oil, is really something that needs to be recognized by the world. The region is changing. The United States is here to stay, but also others are coming. China, other forces, other countries will have an increasing interest in this part of the world. And if Iraq doesn't have the institutions, the leadership, the knowledge, and I really believe that it can, to handle these relationships, it will continue to be the subject of outside interference more than the generator of peace and security for the rest of the region. And let me close by saying that I think what I was most inspired by this morning's presentations was one other thing. You know, this country has relied for too long on oil. And the money that oil makes to make sure that the revenue is distributed, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly, to the people. But what it really needs to rely on is a capital that it hasn't tapped on until now, and that is the vast potential of the Iraqi people. Iraq's growing population, its growing youth population, deserves that the oil revenues that the country makes are used to make sure that people get the best education, the best healthcare, the best opportunities to develop an economy that is not reliant on hydrocarbons, but is reliant on innovation in the future. And with the historical and the cultural diversity this country has, with the traditions that it has in crafts, in arts, in innovation, it can be that leader. And this is where the region is going. I'm quite positive about where Iraq is now, and I really see the opportunities going forward for the country and for the rest of the Middle East.
Thank you so much for that intervention. I think what I'm hearing now is from both speakers so far is that you can look at the situation in Iraq within the context of the wider region as the glass half full. Things are going well in some ways. There are good steps being taken. There's a certain pragmatism. There's a focus on really concrete issues. At the same time, the glass is also half empty. There is corruption, fasad, gandali. And that is causing a lot of harm, and it's also keeping outside
Requires time, and time ticks away. You know, we talk about this being the 20th anniversary of the removal of Saddam. That means that Iraq's leaders have been in power for 20 years. That is not a short period of time. And therefore, you can't constantly look to the past. Eventually, you know, there has to be accountability for the present and the future. And I think that, from an international relations standpoint, is very important. Iraq will continue to be a place of proxy wars. It will continue to be a place of internal division if Iraqi leaders allow themselves to do the bidding of external forces as opposed to putting Iraqi sovereignty and interests first.
Wonderful. Thank you, Raad. It's a good warning. It chimes with what Jeanine said earlier, and it's bracing. I mean, we have to understand the challenges, but you've laid them out in such a way that we know what the way forward could be, if only we had more visionaries and strategic vision and the right people stepping forward into the positions of decision making. So thank you for that. I'm now going to Elena Soponina and ask her again within the international context, since you are from Russia, you will have your own views, how you see the situation developing in the region as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
نفسها. والآن نحن نتابع بأن نفس المؤسسات بعض الأحيان في الغرب تنشر بأن الفيدرالية في روسيا هي ليست جيدة، وعلى هذه الدولة أن تتقسم مثل ما تقسم الاتحاد السوفيتي السابق. صدقوني هذا الشيء لن يحدث، ومن يكتب ويقترح هذا الشيء هو يمكن يخطئ في فهمه لطبيعة الشخص الروسي. لأنه مثل ما هو الشخص العراقي، هذا الكلام بالعكس يثير حفيظة مواطني روسيا ويساعد على التفاف الناس حول الكرملين وحول رئيس بوتين، وهذا لابد من هذا الشيء. فبالنسبة لروسيا هذا الصراع الآن هو الصراع الوجودي. فما هو دور الشرق الأوسط في هذا الشيء والعلاقة ما بين روسيا والشرق الأوسط في كل هذه المعادلات والتقلبات؟ أنا أكثر من مرة في زماني التقيت برئيس الوزراء الروسي السابق سيد يفغيني بريماكوف المرحوم، وفكرته الأساسية كانت، وهو بالذات أنا أعرف هذا بشكل جيد، طرح فكرة تعدد الأقطاب. فروسيا تؤمن بأن تعدد الأقطاب هذا الأمر لابد منه. فالشرق الأوسط هو لا شك يمثل القطب المهم في هذه المعادلة المستقبلية. فدور الشرق الأوسط أولا في بناء العالم الجديد بتعزيز أدوار دول وأقاليم بشكل جديد وبعدالة أكثر، وهذا ما كتبته الدراسة المهمة حوالي 5 صفحات لوزارة الخارجية الصينية تم نشرها في نهاية فبراير. هم قالوا وانتقدوا بشدة سياسة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في هذه المنطقة وغيرها، وقالوا أن السعي للعالم بتعدد الأقطاب لابد منه. الدور الثاني للشرق الأوسط كما نراه في موسكو نراه الآن هو الدور التوسطي. سابقا روسيا وهي ما زالت تلعب الدور التوسطي مثلا في تطبيع العلاقات ما بين سوريا ورئيس أسد اليوم موجود في موسكو وتركيا، ما بين سوريا وتركيا وإيران في إطار التعاون الثلاثي. ولكن ما نراه وما نرحب به أن دول الشرق الأوسط أيضا بدأت تلعب دورا توسطيا، مثلا تركيا، المملكة العربية السعودية، الإمارات، كل هذه الدول لعبت دورا مهما في الأشهر الأخيرة في موضوع تبادل الأسرى بين روسيا وأوكرانيا، في موضوع تبادل السجناء ما بين روسيا وأمريكا. وحسب معلوماتي هذا الدور هو مستمر، ولا بد من صفقة جديدة ما بين روسيا وأوكرانيا حول الأسرى، وما بين روسيا وأمريكا حول تبادل السجناء. روسيا دائما كانت تسعى وما زالت لبناء توازنات في منطقة الشرق الأوسط. موسكو لا تسعى لبناء تحالف ضد تحالف آخر، فهذا صعب جدا، لأنه يمكن أسهل أن يشكل واحد تحالف ضد تحالف وأن يؤجج أزمات المنطقة لكي يستفيد مثل ما نقول فرق وتسد. لا، روسيا سياستها غير، ولكن هذا في غاية الصعوبة، الحفاظ على العلاقة المتوازنة مع كل من تركيا ودول عربية، إسرائيل وإيران. أنا برأيي هذا الدور سيستمر، فهذا هو الدور الثالث لهذا الشيء. وأخيرا الدور الرابع، مثل ما كتبت الآن شركة البحوث راند كوربوريشن، الشرق الأوسط هي منطقة وحيدة في العالم ممكن أن نلاقي فيها نقاط التماس ما بين روسيا ودول الغرب، وحتى ما بين روسيا والولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. أنا أؤمن أنه في نهاية المطاف لابد من إجراء المفاوضات حتى حول موضوع أوكرانيا وعلى التفاهمات العامة على المسرح الدولي. فدور الشرق الأوسط هون مهم للغاية. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا لك. I'm very happy you spoke in a sort of nice Fusha and not in Iraqi accent, because I would not have been able to follow you, I think. That's no comments on the Iraqi language. But the last speaker on the panel, I would like to give the words to Peter Bergen. The United States as a player has come up repeatedly in the last few presentations, but in a sort of superficial way only. And I was wondering if you could give some depth to what the United States is doing in the region. And you can go back and not limit yourself to Iraq, but of course it would be good to look at it, especially in the context of the intervention in Iraq in 2003 and what happened afterward, and what that means for the United States in the region more broadly, given everything else that is going on. And this only in 5 or 6 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Barham, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I feel like a total imposter because I'm neither a former government official or a current one, and I'm certainly not an expert on Iraq. However, I basically want to make 3 points. One is about U.S. engagement. You know, the United States has 2,500 troops in Iraq, which you might say, look, that's a very small number. But interestingly, that's exactly the same number of troops the United States had in Afghanistan. And we all know what happened after those troops were pulled out. Now, I'm not saying Afghanistan's Iraq or anything close to that, but what I am saying is that those 2,500 American troops are very significant for the United States' long-term engagement in Iraq. If there are no troops, I think there will be no American engagement. And let's look at 2024. Let's do the thought experiment where President Donald Trump says, hey, let's take these troops out. Or let's do the thought experiment where some other president, President DeSantis, says the same thing. And think about the effects I think that would have on the region. And we've already run this videotape once before. President Obama, as you know, took all American troops out of Iraq in 2011, and look what followed. We still have, by the way, 900 American troops in the United States, still has 900 American troops in Syria. I think these troop presences are very important. And you're about to hear from Lieutenant General Terry Wolfe in conversation with Amina al-Arabi. Lieutenant General Wolfe was instrumental in the US-led campaign against ISIS. Obviously, it was an Iraqi campaign on the ground. But I think he would agree that maintaining these troop presences are very important politically in the United States and I think for the region. The second point is I would say that the United States has done very little self-examination about the Iraq war on the following level. We all know that what happened after the US invasion, so I'm not going to detain you with any of that. But I think the Iraq war was conducted under, I think it would be sort of generous to say, false subsiding. We could see the Cold War that has played out in Lebanon also subsiding if indeed this diplomatic breakthrough brokered by the Chinese holds. So I think from an American's perspective, this should also take some self-reflection.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm going to open the floor to questions. Some questions have already started to come in. I'll turn to them in a second. I want to first ask one question that any of you on the panel can answer, all of you if you want, but you only get 1 minute each. And it's the kind of question that deserves a little bit more than 1 minute. I already mentioned that when it comes to the international community, there is very little interest in investing in Iraq as long as the corruption is so bad and the institutions are weak and everything else. So there's so in a way, it doesn't want to do more than it's already doing. It would like things to keep moderately stable so that things don't fall apart. External intervention doesn't become completely destabilizing. On the other hand, it also seems that, and this may be counterintuitive and a little bit ironic, but since 2011, the region has become in bad shape because of the civil wars that have broken out in Yemen, Libya, Syria. We have high tensions, Israel-Palestine at the moment with the new Israeli government. Iran, the United States, is, without a nuclear deal, is not in a good state. But Iraq actually, by comparison, looks pretty calm. And that is, again, as a bit counterintuitive. So that also means that for the international community, again, such as it is, it's sort of, what you can't see, you won't need to act on. So what is it really that you think that your country and your countries and the institutions we've created for the international order can and should do concretely for Iraq in the coming period to pull it into a better direction, working with Iraqi leaders, of course. Who wants to go first? You would like? Yes, please.
Well, thank you very much. I think to get the interest from other countries, you need to be part of the solution. And one of the big challenges now is the green transition. That's what we are working with all the time because it's both for the climate but also for economic reason. And there needs to be a view that Iraq or other Middle East countries is part of the solution. And right now there is not a view on that. And I think that is one of the big challenges. And I saw when I read up for this panel that if you take the whole MENA region, from Mauritania to Afghanistan, 600 million people, 97% of all the innovation the last year has come from Israel. 97%. There need to be, with all those, with the university, with the people, with the sources, there ought to be much more coming from these countries because the potential is there. But it's not used, and maybe that is also because there is not any intention or incentive to make the change, because the change will also cost.
Thank you, that was beautiful. Nikolai and then Raad.
Very briefly, I think there should be two focuses. One, obviously, is institutions. No country can function without strong institutions that have buy-in from the population and that are built on rules that are observed by everyone. And in this sense, I think going back to the Constitution, to the parts of the Constitution that have not been implemented, to really revamping large parts of the legislative base of Iraq, which in many cases still relies on legislation from Saddam Hussein's time, is an important task. And I think this is where the international community can help. But secondly, also I think we, from the outside, need to recognize that we haven't always cracked the code of how to communicate with Iraqis. We have to recognize that we're dealing with an extremely traumatized society that has been traumatized for generations by all kinds of outside interventions and forces, and that society has its own mechanisms of reaching consensus and mechanisms of reaching agreement that we need to respect and to work with.
Thank you very much. Raad and then Helen.
One of the joys of having multiple identities is you get to be schizophrenic, so I'll give you a schizophrenic answer on this. Look, I've followed, obviously, the oil industry in Iraq very closely, And I think one of the things that Iraq is going to have to do, if you take the example of the oil industry, which, let's face it, had companies lining up to throw tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars into the country, and was seen as the most exciting thing of the sort of 2000s, certainly, and into the 2010s, is Iraq's going to have to restore its reputation. Because what it did with the oil companies and what it did with the oil investment was dangle promise and subsequently failed to be a capable partner in the investment environment. And that was simple things like capacity to be able to negotiate, capacity to be able to implement, be able to follow up on strategic plans, develop infrastructure. Oh, and that little thing, pay your bills, which oil companies tend to find being rather important. And that wasn't happening. So as I look at it from an outside perspective, you know, what investors want is confidence that they will get return on their investments. The essence of that is predictability and rule of law. And as long as you have gross corruption, and as long as you don't have strong institutions, that isn't going to happen. Now I'll put my schizophrenic hat on and say, energy transitions and climate looks very different from Europe and the United States than it does here. And if you want a conversation with Iraq about energy transitions and climate, have it on Iraqi terms. Quite frankly, there are two parts of the energy transitions debate. There is climate mitigation and climate adaptation. The West is obsessed with climate mitigation, reducing emissions. And it can do that because it's reached an economic stage where it can start to make compromises and has an industrial base where energy transitions actually is to industrial benefit. What Europe is doing, what the United States is doing, is using green transitions as the basis for a protectionist industrial system. So actually coming and lecturing the world in terms of energy transitions doesn't work. What matters here, and there are two gentlemen in this audience sitting in front of me who've said this openly, is climate adaptation. This country's problem is not emissions per se. It produces less than 0.5% of the emissions of the world. It is how you address the impact of climate and how you get international support to help you address that impact. And as long as we have the debate right now, which is essentially either have hydrocarbons or don't have hydrocarbons, good and bad energy, good and bad policy, you get nowhere. What you need is an understanding that energy transitions means very different things to very different countries based on their economic development, based on their political development, and based on what hits them. Drying up rivers, salination, fisheries going out, agriculture being impacted, urban migration. Those are the issues you have to address here, and quite frankly, solar and wind don't address those issues. That can come later, but deal with the issues that matter most to Iraq.
Indeed. Very sobering reminder of how we need to always communicate better about our respective interests and abilities. So really thank you for that, Raad. I know, Elena, you wanted to come in as well on the question.
Yes, thank you. Russia strongly believes that it's not international order without the stability in this region. In 2014, Russia provided maybe not so big, but very quick and needed help to Baghdad when it was needed against Daesh. And this kind of cooperation is still developing now, and Russia supports strongly Baghdad initiative and all efforts of Iraq as a mediator in this region, as Russia strongly supports now the efforts of China towards Saudi Arabia and Iran. Moscow also understands that it's no way for any military solution to any crisis here in this region, as also Russia supports the returning of Syria to the Arab League as a normal member of, an active member of this organization. And Russia is working hard now to improve relationship between Turkey and Syria. And I'm sure that there is also at the interest of Iraq as a state of this region, all efforts of Iraqi state in this issue also supported very strongly by Russia.
Thank you, Elena. Okay, so questions from the audience. We have exactly 8 minutes left, maybe give or take a couple. I'll go trying to stay within the overall theme. There was a question which I think has been addressed, if not answered, which is almost impossible, but, and it was for you, Ms. Linde, is do you think Iraq is ready for the green transition and circular economy? But after what we heard from Ra'ad al-Qadiri, the question may be, does Sweden understand well what the Iraqi needs are, and is it adapting or tailoring its policies when it comes to the green transition to the situation in countries like Iraq? And you don't have to limit yourself to Iraq, you've dealt with many in your position as foreign minister. Do you have a view on that?
Well, the fact is that we think, even if I listen with interest to what you said, that we need to get into a fossil-free energy mix, and we need to phase out sooner rather than later coal and oil and gas. And of course that is difficult for a country that is dependent on oil. But I think that right now, as I said, United States no longer buys any oil. They are by far the biggest producer of oil and gas. Who could believe that just 20 years ago? And it's China and India who is now main buyer of the oil. But it's also an ending resources. It will not be there for if you look, as I said, with the perspective of 30 years. On 30 years, now we're talking 20 years in 2003. And many of us feels like 2003 was a few years ago. I mean, it's much quicker than you think. And what I said is that some countries have started the transition and some countries has not. And I think the future is dependent on a transition. I was in South Africa in December, and we talked a lot about these changes, and they have enormous problem with energy shortage, enormous problems. And they will try to make a transition. At the same time, they said, but we need to go back to coal. And then there will not be these possibility to help them economically or with innovation or with investments, because the rest of the Western world that have a lot of investment in South Africa now will not go for that, will not go for that solution. So it's a short-sighted solution to only rely on the fossil energy. You need to see it in the longer term.
That's an issue, of course, that has come up in the case of Europe as well, because it found itself very vulnerable after the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
We changed faster than anybody thought was possible. Look at Germany.
You had a mild winter to help you, fortunately. So there was an adaptation that was actually remarkable. But you know, last year there was a real concern that there would be a real shortage, and that Europe would have to go to the spot market at much higher prices and buy up gas, which would immediately drive the price up further and make it very difficult for poorer countries to purchase their gas. And of course that affects then their position on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So everything is linked. And so we all have to have foresight in a way and not become overly dependent and diversify early on. And I think as part of the green transition, we really need to find a way to manage the period between where we are now, which is heavy dependence on hydrocarbons, and a situation where we want to be, which is net zero. That's going to be a very difficult transition. Anyway, I'm talking too much. I got a lovely question here from Omar Sheikh Moos. Hello, good to see you again. In the case of regime change in Iran, his question, not mine, because I don't predict it. What are the potential consequences in Iraq? Well, does anyone want to tackle that? Yes, Ra'ad. I knew you would be ready for that.
Regime change, as this country has demonstrated over the past 20 years, sounds really good on paper. It's really messy in reality. And I think when you start to look at what the impact of regime change in Iran will be on Iraq, that's a question about what regime change looks like in Iran and whether you think you are going to move to a more stable system, irrespective of its nature, whether you think it is going to be a system that can consolidate itself, that has backing, and that fundamentally is going to bring something more benign and more stable than you have right now. I think those are huge questions. And I think those who see somehow, and again, it tends to be an outsider view, not an insider view, that regime change in Iran suddenly transforms the Middle East and transforms Iraq, haven't really been reading their history of late.
Peter, please.
There are a couple of points to make. One, why would a new Iranian regime be less interested in nuclear weapons? And that's sort of a false assumption. And two, Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan in 1651 at the end of the English Civil War. And the basic point of Leviathan, there's only one thing worse than a despot. It's civil war and anarchy. And we've seen that play. And Americans make the same type of decision, doesn't matter which administration. Obama made the same decision in Libya, in a sense, that George W. Bush made in Iraq. And this is a bipartisan failure to basically not envision what will come next, which is not an apology for authoritarian dictators, but it is a kind of a plea to, let's learn from our history.
Yeah, thank you. There also is the question, of course, of how does regime change happen? It's a sort of a fuzzy term. It can be top-down, can be bottom-up. That would affect how it will look afterward. So, and you could also ask the question, it's a real dilemma. You say, well, regime change creates chaos and violence and uncertainty, no investment, everything else, a very difficult transition, as maybe we have seen to a great extent here. On the other hand, is the current situation acceptable? Is it when there are paramilitaries that are not directly answerable to the state? Ideally, I think Iraq would like to have a state that can have control over all various actors, especially security ones. Anyway, I forgot to recognize earlier that the question about the green transition was from Paima Ahmed. Thank you for that. And finally, there is a question from Dr. Ali Sabah. He asks, how does the international community evaluate the Iraqi situation in view of a government they were afraid to cooperate with, keeping in mind that this government is a product of the 20 years of foreign policy influence since 2003. In other words, this government is the outcome of a foreign intervention, indirectly, but of course, it's been consistent trajectory for the last 20 years. Why is the international community hesitant now to interact with it? I'm not sure that's the premise is correct, but if anyone wants to address it, yes, please, Nikolai.
Well, first of all, let me begin by saying that for the 20 years since the end of Saddam's regime, Iraq, with all the faults of all of its legislation and election laws and sectarian politics, with all that in mind, has been able to switch governments consistently in a peaceful manner. And all, forgive me for saying it, former presidents and prime ministers are alive, and many of them are sitting in this room, and that is a very, very serious achievement. And yes, transition is messy, but transition from a society which has relied on the decision of one man and his ability to wield life and death on everybody, to a society in which political parties emerge, institutions develop, people vote, again, with all the problems that has been in the past. in a peaceful manner, I think is quite an important success. Of course, that doesn't mean that the challenges, that the system doesn't need to be upgraded and updated consistently in order to reflect what people need and to make it more functional. It is, for me personally, it is embarrassing, if I can use that word, to think that a country as rich as Iraq has the difference of living standards that exist between the people in Basra, in Tikar, in Baghdad, in Erbil, in Suleymaniyah, in Ramadi, and in Mosul, and across the whole country. There's no excuse for any government not to focus on building up the infrastructure, the roads, the universities, the education system, the healthcare system, and everything. There's enough money for that. And I think where the problem has been is that with all the focus on the democracy and transition and power, we lost a little bit of the focus of the need to really build institutions in Iraq that sustain the state. And that is a focus that we need to return to very soon in order to make what is already a good base into a real success for the country. Forget the region. I'm not talking about the region. I'm just talking about this country because of the responsibility that its leaders have to its own welfare.
And this is the second time you've mentioned the importance of institutions. I think it's very true. And I remember talking with Ra'ad and Toby Dodge, who's in the audience, in 2003 about the hole in the heart of Iraq. There were no institutions that could uphold a new order, and they needed to be rebuilt. But that process is, of course, of long term, is very difficult, and we're still in the process of, I'm not, but in the process of doing so.
But who is responsible for this hole? This is also important question.
Responsible for what?
For this hole, for the creation of this instability. This is also an important question. There are some countries that are responsible for this, but they do nothing, maybe, or they do not enough to solve all these problems created because of their policies.
This is a longer discussion about the origins and the original sins of the American invasion. We could have a long argument and we would agree on many things, maybe disagree on some. In any case, point well taken. Also, I should say that as a researcher for Human Rights Watch, I know what the previous regime did. I mean, every Iraqi knows what the previous regime did, but as an outsider, I certainly was researching the Anfal campaign in 1988. So if you ask me what is better before or after 2003, I have my answer. But, Anne, please.
Well, thank you. I just reacted to the wording of the question, why is governments hesitant to cooperate with the Iraqi government? And I would say that that is not the case. Other government is not hesitant to cooperate with Iraqi government. And as I just said, I and my counterpart have had many discussions on very, very difficult issues. But the fact that it's relatively peaceful now, and there has been a transition, there is a prime minister in place, there is the question of ISIS is a little bit on hold. That means that this make the urgency of having very close relation not the same as when there is the conflict. And then you have to see on what issues should we cooperate. We should cooperate on multilateralism. We should cooperate on development when it comes to the issues that is the most pressing, and that is now green transition and climate. And maybe in a way that you say we need to do it, but that's the fact. It's on the top of the agenda. I mean, listen to Guterres. He cannot say a word without mentioning this. And it's economic development. And to get the economic development, everybody has said it, you need to get rid of the corruption, of course, but you also need to get the issue of stable order and rule base better. And I've heard some, and you will hear later, some witnesses of how difficult it is to get permits, to get the possibility to have your company in
Suli, if you already are in Erbil, for example, you need to get rid of that if you want to have more economic possibilities and cooperation. And I think people really, really need that. So it's not hesitation. It's just interest, common interest. And we need, if we don't have it, we need to create it.
So I'm being told to wrap it up. I'm very sorry. We'll have to talk over tea later. Your Excellencies, thank you for listening. I thought it was an engaging conversation. It's a much longer one, obviously. I want to thank you all, the panelists, for joining us here today, and all of you for listening. And the conversations will, I'm sure, continue in the hallway. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Please remain seated. The next session will begin in just a few minutes. This will be the last session before we head to lunch.